Record to the cloud. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for your help. Thank you everyone for joining. We had intended to start the breakout group a little earlier, but I think I'm the primary culprit in running a little bit long in presenting. So my apologies, this won't be as long as we'd hoped. But thank you so much for joining. Oh, and I have to say thank you to GIZ for sponsoring this session. So I would really love for this to be interactive and actual dialogue and to hear people's thoughts. And I saw a comment in the chat about trust and the use of village savings and loans groups. And I thought it might be interesting to start with this discussion about trust and equity, because I don't think it comes up much as a sort of independent pillar of governance, even though we all know it's important. But I think those two things are sort of wrapped up within other conversations about accountability and transparency. So I was really keen to hear from you all who have experience working in the water sector, your experience about how to build trust and equity explicitly as part of good governance, especially if around professionalized water services or privatization of water services, and how those two elements play into sustainability of the water system as a whole, perhaps into financing, as someone brought up, but into the broader water system. I'm happy for people to jump in or raise their hands or whatever. Does anyone want to go first? I know it's a big question. How do you?
I can jump in with it's more of a comment than a specific response to your question, but I saw Chris's comment as well on the importance of trust, and that's one thing that our organization has found in some of the research that we've done as well. So I guess I should introduce myself. My name's Tanner Hoffman. I'm the program director for the Ugandan Water Project, and we're presently working on rolling out a professionalized operation and maintenance program. And actually the name, like the brand name of our service is called Aqua Trust, because we identified trust as, one of those primary drivers for community buy-in and like you alluded to, good governance. So we did a small market research study in one of the districts that we work in, where we were just asking community members and water committee members, some of their thoughts about like a professionalized operation and maintenance service for their rural boreholes. And trust was one thing that came up again and again. One of the things that we heard was, right now the water users don't trust the water committees. Sometimes they eat the money, like they'd rather pay for a professionalized service that, they can rely on, that they can trust. And it was some of that feedback that we were receiving that really led us to focus on that name, Aqua Trust. So not an answer to your overarching question, but just a comment on, that's one thing that we found and identified in the small amount of research that we've done in our work.
Lewis, I see that hand. Go ahead.
Once I can unmute.
Yes.
So I don't know anybody who's not pro-trust. It's not a bad thing, but I guess, isn't it better to have a contractual relationship where the community knows what to expect, and where instead of relying on the community managed services and the government to do the right thing and to hope that trust works out, that there's actually some sort of professional approach to this that is much more likely. I mean, in the urban areas, we don't just trust. We pay our utility bills and we expect that the utilities will meet their service requirements and under public utility commissions. So I'm not antitrust. I'm just not sure that that's a long-term sustainable solution to rural water service provision.
Yeah, I hear you. And I see Patrick and Chris both had their hands up, so I'm going to be extremely brief. And we saw that trust did come out of contractual relationships or these sort of formal arrangements, when people felt that there would be consequences if they were broken. And if they felt that the person or the group was trustworthy because they either knew them or they knew there was a history of good performance. And so that sort of trust of buying in the first place, it was sort of, how do you develop that initial like chicken and egg? I trust you, so I'm going to buy in to this relationship. But Patrick and Chris, I think Patrick, you had your hand. I feel like a kindergarten teacher. Patrick, I think you had your hand up first.
Thanks. Yeah. No, I was just going to chip in. I mean, I agree with. Firstly, I agree with Lewis about, yeah, trust isn't a substitution for a contractual relationship. But I'd also say the other way around, that like we wouldn't enter into a contractual relationship with people we didn't trust in some sense. So I think they're linked. But I was just going to add to what Tanner was saying, that in our experience, I'm from Patrick Thompson at Oxford University, but also set up Fundi Fix in Kenya that some of you know Lewis knows quite a lot about. And we found, talking to the team there, that getting communities to sign up to what they've been doing, which is a heavily subsidized service, they've had some struggles with the trust issues, because as Tanner was saying, some of the existing committees were eating the money. But they said the problem is that informally they pick this up from talking to people, but it's very difficult to really quantify and sort of pin down, because it's the sort of thing where people will say, someone will say anecdotally, this is what the issue is, but actually doing formal research to actually identify this problem is incredibly hard, because people are not going to go on record and say that guy's taking the money. So I think it's a tricky one. I mean, I haven't got an answer, but I just wanted to sort of back up what Tanner said and said, we at least got two anecdotes of that from different places.
Yeah, Chris.
Great. No, thank you. I mean, happy to, first of all, I guess Chris Pratis from the Water Trust. We do wash work in rural Uganda. I think we kind of have like one success and one failure that to me gets at this trust issue. So to start with the failure. So we work in schools and have been making investments in water, sanitation, hygiene infrastructure there. We stopped doing that work because we found that the infrastructure was not going to be sustained. There was no viable model to sustain it. The latrines were not going to be desludged, et cetera. And we piloted a few different approaches where we tried to build the capacity of the school to manage itself. The financial management capacity was essentially non-existent, expense reporting non-existent, all that stuff. We built that capacity the best we could. We got local leaders from these catchment areas of the school, brought them in. There was incredible distrust of the teachers and the parents both ways, very low willingness to pay. And what we couldn't figure a way to address that. Like, to me, that's for a good example of something. We don't have an answer for that problem, but it's clearly a trust issue. You're not going to get more money from them to pay for any of that. And if you give the school more money, you can't be sure that they're going to use it that way. If the district were to give the money, for example. So there's different ways you could fix that. You don't have to fix it in a bottom-up trust building way, but to me, there's a big vacuum there. I think the success we had is looking at those communities where they have the borehole catchment area. And that's where we have the Village Savings Loan Association methodology, tried and true method to create a self-sustaining, financially empowered village institution that's heavily democratic, heavily transparent, highly trusted. And if you take that institution rather than a water user committee and have that manage and collect the use funds from the catchment area, that's really effective. And I think it does really create that trust, because I think to the earlier comments, it's contracts and trust go together. And I think contracts are not enough. You have to see and observe repeated behaviors to build trust. And that's what you get in a Village Savings Loan Association.
Chris, what's the difference between, quickly, since we don't have much time, what's the difference between that approach and the classic the classic water user committee?
Great question. So these groups are primarily savings and credit cooperatives. So these community members come together each week. The primary mission for them personally is to invest their personal savings that they then collect. So while we think $100 for a repair is a lot of money, these groups generate, I mean, from a community perspective, these groups are generating $1,000 to $3,000 in shared savings and credit each year. So they have personal savings also. So you're not asking them to save money. You built
on a existing trusted community institution and got them into the water biz rather than trying to set up a separate water user committee.
Basically, we create the groups now ourselves too. So we've taken the methodology, adapted it for the water purpose. But then, yeah, like you said, I think to me, the value is free riding essentially on what is a self-perpetuating like institution that has a profit incentive for participation for the community members. But yes, generally.
That's neat. And I guess sort of building on that and thinking about schools that you brought up as well, there are so many overlaps, obviously, at the community level between water and other sectors, right? And the household, like family needs for agriculture and healthcare and education and so on. And, you know, there are often these, particularly for women, these like group savings and loans structures. And I'm wondering if anyone's seen any other crossovers with other kinds of mechanisms or technologies, other groups that maybe could be used for better governance in water that we haven't really thought about or taken advantage of yet.
I guess
yeah, I've seen them in India, in Orissa. I've seen them in multiple places where you take, like Chris said, a trusted existing institution, whether it's a woman's self-help group or something else, and build off of it. That's not unheard of. I'm still less of a fan of expecting the community to manage its own water than getting somebody in there professionally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add, I mean, I think that there's a lot to learn from, like there's this whole civil society budget advocacy world, right, that exists that's not limited to WASH at all. And to me, there's a lot to learn from there. And so I think from my perspective, I would love to see more, including from our own organization, more collaboration with those sectors where WASH is one part of the advocacy agenda. It's one part of the accountability agenda, but it doesn't try to, again, create its own parallel structure from all the other governance issues that these people have with their, you know, local government. To me, I feel like, I guess one lesson I feel like from our work is you're more successful if you make WASH a part of a bigger conversation than trying to have a smaller conversation about WASH.
Yeah, so I'd agree, Chris, completely. I just not want to be the grumpy guy, but I just one example, again, it's an anecdote of the opposite, was the water committee were doing quite well and they were getting funds, and then they said, we've got all this excess cash, let's use it for something else and make the most of it. And then their liquidity evaporated, even though in theory they had the value, which meant that if they did need a repair, they would have to then sort that out in order to actually pay for it. So there can be another side to it too.
Just going to take issue, Patrick. I usually get to be the grumpy guy in the room, so you know.
I don't mind having a grumpy competition. So one thing that we didn't touch on, or I sort of have, oh, we're almost out of time, but I had two questions that I wanted to throw over to people who have more experience. And one was about technology, that we often see that it can help with accountability and transparency and so on, but how do you use that or take advantage in settings where people don't have a lot of access or familiarity with like smart technology? And then my other question was the WASH, the sanitation and hygiene part of WASH, which we didn't touch at all in this project. But if you see any like crossovers or learnings for sanitation and hygiene as well, I don't know if anyone want to pick up one of those two questions.
I want to ask a related question, which occurred to me as I was in parts of Uganda looking at things that didn't, some places worked and didn't. I have rarely seen a sign next to a water point that says, for the last month, this facility has been operating 29 out of 30 days. And I'm wondering, no, I mean, I'm serious. It seems
I know.
If that's what people care about, you know, and this comes from, you know, learning in India about education, where one of the things they started doing was just publicly reporting when the teacher showed up to work and didn't, and that had a remarkable impact on
and nurses too, right? At healthcare settings, like the nurses and the doctors showing up.
Right. So I'm just curious, are there tools that have been used, really simple ones, maybe higher tech, like, you know, can you put a GPS and is the thing working? But even simpler tools that are used to build that trust and to demonstrate what the community cares about, which is reliable water.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, on that, that's a really good point, Lewis. And with Fundifix, I mean, to be honest, I don't know if we kept doing it, to be honest, because because I'm slightly removed from that now. We did originally have a system by which we were going to send a text message to people in the community who'd signed up, sort of essentially every month saying, you know, thanks for paying your subs, your system has worked, you know, or we've done one repair this month or something like that. So I don't know if it's still happening, and we never did any research into, you know, actually how people responded to that and whether that helped through the trust and other issues. But that's, yeah.
The one thing I was going to plug is, like, I just feel like when conversations around technology, we tend to focus on the newest and best technology and the smartphone app and everything like that. And that, like, from my perspective, like, the radio is an example of a tool that's very underutilized, and there's very poor evidence that exists for how you can use the radio. And it's what most people consume for information. So, I mean, I don't know, from my perspective, I would love to see more research in the low tech that's very broadly accessible rather than the high tech that's more narrow, especially in these areas.
Yeah, I've heard about it a lot in the Central African Republic, actually. We're actually just starting to work with the Navajo Nation, who have a lot of issues with, like, connectivity and access to the internet and, like, cell phone coverage and stuff, but they all use the radio. And the radio is, like, a really good mechanism for reaching, like, these really remote communities that don't have a lot of good connectivity.
Most of the research I've seen on that, Chris, relates to hygiene and hand washing. Where the radio is often used as a way to try to, I mean, multiple channels are used, but mass communication in poor areas, radio is usually great.
Yeah, no, I mean, and public address systems, like, mounted on the back of trucks. Like, I feel like those are the things that people, like, if you were selling a product there, what would you use? And you would be using those things. You wouldn't be using, like, a special smartphone app. And so, I mean, I like apps, we have apps too, but I just feel like there's a tendency to, like, overlook and underspend on the sort of more traditional, more broadly accessible approaches.
Yeah, that's true. It'd be neat to see those, you know, those political campaign trucks that, like, drive through with the political party's flag being like, my operating system, 7 days since last breakdown.
Rebecca, I'm curious, you attended, if not all, then most of the Sustainable Wash System closeout sessions.
All of them, I was there.
I remember you with most of them, if not all of them. I am curious, and I know this is a tough question. We may be better off taking it offline since we're already 4 minutes over, I think, on this session. But I'm curious if you see complementary learnings between that program and this one. If you see, if there are things you've learned from this one that might have fed into that, and vice versa. Yeah,
for sure. And I was taking notes during the sessions of, like, oh, that's the same. Oh, that's not something we looked at. I think basically the learnings that came out of the professionalized maintenance services, like the stuff that came out of Fundifix, the stuff that came out of Wave, I think we heard repeated in our work. Just we were looking at things beyond subscription, like other things besides subscription maintenance services, but we heard the same kind of results, that like the same positive outcomes that SWS found, we heard as well, for subscription maintenance, but then for other things, like different kinds of franchising, or I'm trying to think now, but just like different formal ways of setting things up. We heard the same kinds of learnings. We didn't look so much at collective action, so I don't really have like a good crossover there. And we were so local level that we didn't bring a lot of stakeholders into the room. You know, we weren't connecting a lot of NGOs, a lot of higher level government. We didn't look at that more formalized sort of stakeholder analysis and networking. So that was a really good learning for me, was looking at that. And I think from SWS in general, a lot of things were sort of things that I maybe had come across once or twice, or sort of intuitively was like, that seems like it should work, but hadn't really thought about in like a rigorous way. And so it was a good learning for me to see what you were able to really tease out through, what was really able to be teased out through the network analysis. and the collective action approach. So.
But one of the things I heard one of the people say in the main session was that you're developing some sort of idiot's guide for local AID folks to figure out how to take the learning that you've used and continue it. And I guess the nice thing is a short handbook, or not even a handbook, probably a 1 or a 2 pager, because nobody's going to look at more than that. But I think maybe that would be also helpful for the sustainable wash system folks to try to develop tools like that, because I think that was a great program and it did a lot. I've continued to have questions about how much it will influence how AID does things more broadly, but also how it will, and then, you know, at the headquarters level, but certainly at the practical level, at the country and level, whether that sort of learning will really help AID do a better job and get out of the business of just funding hardware. If not get out, but do a better job than that.
Yeah, and we certainly hope that it's going to be helpful in like a day-to-day operational basis. The way the project was set up, the intentional client was operational staff at the mission. Like that was the first priority client, was what can we produce to help them in their day-to-day operations? Like when they're thinking about projects to plan or projects they want to fund, what are some things that they can use to learn about or guide? And it was really interesting, this work coming out of the DRG office, because when we were like in the original like co-creation BAA session, whatever that experience was, it was DRG folks in the room. And so they were like, but why should we work on water? And so we had to sell them on the idea that water was this really important sector and a good lens for looking at governance. And so as we're producing this output, one of the things we've actually had to make is a water primer. Like, this is what a water system looks like. Here's how you run it. Here's like the different parts of a water system. Here's who uses it.
Well, I hope it focuses on sustainable service delivery and not just access. But I am a broken record on that topic. No, that's helpful. And it's interesting that both of these programs came out of that BAA approach. Both this one and Sustainable Wash Systems came out of that, which is sort of fascinating. But thank you. This is great. Really helpful.
Yeah, as Mark said, the publications haven't come out yet. We're in the throes of like product production mode. That's a bit of a tautology, but from our side, we're working on like the more, I guess, academic side of publications, you know, conference proceedings and conference presentations and articles and whatnot. And the team as a whole is working on these USAID focused products that we hope to have out, hey, Kelly, in the near future. But hopefully there'll be some stuff that's more publicly available so you can dive in. Kelly, did you want to jump in for anything? No?
No, I love your points about, you know, us at USAID needing this guidance, because we are so stovepipe. I mean, we see it across all of our sectors, you know, doing health governance and health system strengthening. We first need to learn the language of the other sector. So us on the DRG side, we really are excited about this work under the GROWS project that GETF is doing with OSU. And, you know, I think that the way USAID operates is really very much about within our program cycle, you know, and many of you have worked with our missions and on these things. And so I know the team has done a really good job of trying to identify what are those entry points in the USAID cycle, you know, whether it starts at the strategy and then at the program design and implementation. So we're trying to look across all those points where we can more effectively incorporate, you know, these concerns about trust, about equity, about accountability that are really important to make water service provision more effective. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thanks, Rebecca. I got to hop.
Yeah, I thought they were actually, the conference organizers would like shut this window, but I guess they didn't. So.
Well, I'm glad they didn't. It's been very helpful.
Sticking around.
All right, thank you. I'm gonna hop off as well.
Thank you all.
Thanks all.
Appreciate it.
Bye, Beck.
Good stuff. Thanks, everyone.